Good afternoon and welcome everybody to the two-man game with Chris and Scott live on Bleacher Report app. Hopefully you guys are having a fantastic Thursday. We are here chatting with you guys. My name is Chris. This is Scott. And we are also hosts for ActionLab Sports. We are live over on Twitch and all of our other platforms, actionlabsports.com, every Wednesday, Thursday, and Sunday nights at 9:30 Eastern. So if you're ever looking for sports content to hang out, chat, anything, football, basketball, you name it, come over, hang out with us on those nights, and we would love to have you. But today we are getting into Nuggets 2024 off-season trade ideas. We just had the conclusion of the NBA season. Congratulations to the Boston Celtics, or not. And we, but we're looking forward. We're looking forward because here in Denver, Scotty, the Nuggets are on the – we need to figure out what we're doing this offseason. And given the circumstances, we don't have a lot of flexibility given we're on the fringe of this second apron, the dreaded second apron. We're going to talk about that, but that's what we're getting into.
Yeah, I mean, as you said it, Chris, congrats to the Boston Celtics, sort of, whatever. No, great season for them. They earned it. Best team in the NBA this year. But we coming, Chris. Now, let's turn the page. Nuggets now. We got the draft next week. We got free agency here coming up. We're going to go over some trade ideas that I'm sure everyone's going to love. But this team, as you talked about, doesn't have a lot of flexibility. So we're going to try and get a little creative and have some, decent names, not just, run-of-the-mill role player guys that maybe we could make a splash on if the Nuggets feel inclined to. They could also choose to just run it back, Chris. And that wouldn't surprise me one bit if they just kind of try and get KCP under contract and run it back next year with the guys they have.
Yeah, we talked about this last time we did some trade ideas. The fact that, the Nuggets don't need to do anything crazy. They were on the cusp of winning that series with the Minnesota Timberwolves. And, we've been there, done that. They have a really, really good team. They're contenders moving forward. So we don't need to go crazy with things, but we're going to for this because we have some trade ideas that we think could even push them above where they were in the last couple seasons. Now, the second apron, there are 4 teams that are in this projected to be in this second apron, and that's the Celtics, the Nuggets, the Timberwolves, and the Suns. The threshold is $189.4 million, and there's some restrictions that come with this. So let's get this out of the way first. Teams in this second apron can only re-sign own free agents, sign draft picks, sign players to minimum contracts, and take, when it comes to trades, equal or less salary coming back that doesn't have any aggregated player contracts involved. So that's another aspect of how, we're going to be approaching, taking a look at some of the teams that are going to be in these trade deals and trying to figure out the puzzle that is this whole NBA.
It's a whole new world out there in the NBA with these new collective bargaining stuff with the second apron and first apron. I like it from a competitive balance, but as a Nuggets fan right now, it's not great, Chris. It's not great to be in that potential area. And some of that does matter, with KCP. We are likely looking, if we bring KCP back and sign him to something, we're probably going to be in that second apron as Nuggets. If we don't, then there's some flexibility where we can stay under that apron. But there's big loss, Chris, potentially if you stay in that apron for after 1 year, for 2 of the next 4 years, your draft pick that following year moves all the way back to the end of the first round automatically. So you can't just hang out in the second apron for, 5 straight years and be like, it's okay. Doesn't matter. You don't have a mid-level exception that you can offer free agents and free agency. And as you said, it's not like you can combine 2 guys' salary on your team and trade them for 1 guy on another team who makes more. It has to be even with 1 for 1. So there's a lot of reasons that we'll get into to why the Nuggets might want to stay away from being in that second apron, which means moving on from KCP, which, listen, I don't love that. I like KCP as a player, but if that makes sense, and there's avenues that we'll talk about that maybe makes sense where we stay under the second apron, move on from KCP, and we're still very much a contending team in 2025.
Nick, we have some chatters coming in. So Nick in the chat says we need a solid backup for Jokic. Don't need him playing the whole game. And I mean, we don't have that in our trades today. However, I do think it's something that can be addressed in the draft because there are some decent draft picks that can come in for cheap from the. I mean, there's a couple targets that we're maybe get into on another stream coming up that we'll talk about, knowing that the draft is coming up this coming week. So nice cheap options that can be pretty solid for that. There's also trade options, but we just don't have any centers in our trade options today.
Yeah,
So,
but I'll include a little sprinkle of a guy will sign in free agency on one of these trades in my plan for that trade. Yeah, the Nuggets need a backup center. They need, I think, better shooting off the bench, and they need a ball handler off the bench. A backup point guard that's more reliable than Reggie Jackson. No disrespect, but he wasn't good enough last year. Everyone just missed Bruce Brown. Everyone wants Bruce Brown back. That's not going to happen with what he's making at $20 million. Yeah, we need to add to the depth, and hopefully Michael Malone. Hopefully he didn't see that. Now, I'm scared now. He doesn't like to be called Mike. Hopefully he said in an interview after the fact, looking back at the season, he played the starters too many minutes during the regular season.
Yeah. And so, yeah, let's get into some of these trades. Now, most likely, a lot of these trades are going to be pie in the sky. I think the Nuggets are going to lean towards running it back. So we got to keep that in mind. But these are some fun trade ideas that I think could potentially be interesting to think about. And who knows, if they pull the trigger, it's wow, these could be some interesting ones. So let's go into our first trade, Scotty. And, the Nuggets, they have some draft picks they can, mix in as well. So the first trade that we are going to take a look at involves Michael Porter Jr. In Michael Porter Jr., a 2025 second round pick, a 2026 second round pick to the Brooklyn Nets for Mikal Bridges. And Mikal Bridges, I think, would be, and this would be a home run, in my opinion, for the Denver Nuggets, in the sense that you have somebody coming into Denver that has slotted into that same role, but more defensive minded, still has the ability to shoot, still can space the floor, and has that feel. And I think could thrive around a guy like Jokic, who's a playmaker and can maximize everything. Mikal's, 10th overall in 2018, and he can shine as a role player in this Denver Nuggets offense. Meanwhile, if you take a look at the other side of this trade, Scotty, the Brooklyn Nets end up getting some boost in offense, maybe a higher ceiling boost with, what they have going on. Cam Thomas, Dorian Finney-Smith, Nick Claxton, a lot of defensive-minded guys, a lot of defensive players on that. It's a weird team, by the way. Like, they have so many.
Many wings. It's wing central. They have like 8. Their whole roster is like 6'5", 6'6" wings.
They're the island of misfit wings, power forwards, and centers. Like, they just have so many options. Now, I will say I have some just small Zeke trades for Day'Ron Sharpe or Noah Clowney kind of in the background that could potentially work. So they have a lot of options. They have a lot of depth in those areas, but they need offense. So, the Nuggets end up getting a guy that can help be a very good role player, defensive-minded, and still help offensively. Brooklyn Nets get a guy that can elevate their offensive abilities. So that would be my first option for a trade there.
Yeah, I mean, Chris, keep in mind, we're Nuggets fans, guys, so we might lean in favor of the Nuggets. I feel like this is if Brooklyn agrees to this deal, do it in a second. And I like MPJ. I'm on the boat that we don't need to move MPJ. I don't want to move MPJ. Now, if we can move MPJ for Mikal Bridges in a couple seconds, sign me up. Like, yeah, absolutely. Now it might take a little more than that. It might be like MPJ, Christian Brown or Peyton Watson, and like a first, Chris, to get Mikal Bridges. Because not only is Mikal Bridges a hell of a player, Chris, he's making like 13 million less than 12 million less than MPJ next year. So
he's so affordable.
We're saving money in that scenario. But I love Mikal Bridges' game. I think, Phoenix, in hindsight, regrets probably moving. I mean, they had to do what they had to do to get Kevin Durant. Obviously, that hasn't necessarily worked out for him. But yeah, Mikal Bridges as another ball handler, guard, wing that can hit the three, would be fantastic. And one of the few guys I would be okay with if we are going to move on from MPJ. We got to get a stud in return. We can't just get like two lesser players and try and fill the void that MPJ is, because I probably am higher on MPJ than you a little bit, Chris, as a Nuggets fan. But like, yeah, he had a bad series against Minnesota, but the guy is a lethal shooter. He's 6'10". He needs to add a little bit more to his game offensively with driving and getting in the lane. But he was great in our first round against the Lakers. Dude was fantastic. You could argue outside of Jokic, he was our second best player in that series. He was our second best player in that series.
Yeah. Michael Porter Jr., I mean, he has the higher ceiling offensively between the two players. Let's put it like it is. I mean, he's 25 years old. We talk about players getting in their, the superstars getting in that prime of like 25 through 28, 29 is kind of like that prime. And he's kind of getting to that point where he's learning a ton and he's getting better. We need the consistency. And I think that's what we lacked from an offensive standpoint from series to series in this last playoff run. And so the fact that he disappears and you can't necessarily rely on him, you need him to do other things. And he wasn't able to do those things from a defensive standpoint when you have to pull him off the court and in late scenarios defensively, because he's not an ideal option in a last second shot situation. I feel like there's still, for a player making the money that he's making, he needs to get better there. So, with Mikal Bridges, I think that there's a really good option to fix a couple of those if you're able to somehow convince the Brooklyn Nets to make that trade. So, I mean, the Nets, again, they need to make something happen because they have a weird roster.
Yeah. This would be the only 6'10" guy on the roster, I feel like. Like, I don't even know if they don't have point guards or centers. It's just everything in between.
Yes. So a lot of great options in the chat. A lot of people chatting and
a lot of people throwing
ideas.
out some old friend alerts. Monte Morris, which I like Monte Morris. And he wasn't heavily involved with Minnesota. And I saw Mason Plumlee, which, if we have to get that point, I'm not a huge Mason Plumlee guy, but he'd be a more serviceable backup than we had, in the last year at least. So if that's what it's doing, we have to settle for a vet minimum and bring back Plumlee. Fine.
We also have Lauri Markkanen would be a backup for Jokic.
Ooh, well, good segue.
Good segue. I appreciate that. You're not going to be disappointed because I have on our next trade option Lauri Markkanen in the deal. So in this deal, and by the way, so in order to make this next deal happen, we would need to move on or to not bring back KCP in order for us to aggregate a couple contracts to get to this point. So KCP would be on the way out. We would need to fill in that role at some level. But we have some people, young players on our bench, i.e. Christian Brown and some other guys that can come in and kind of fix some of that. But let's keep that in mind for this trade coming up. In this next proposed trade, we have Michael Porter Jr. again, because he seems to have the most value of everybody when it comes to the upside of his skill set offensively. So Michael Porter Jr., Zeke Naji, who hasn't been as big of a impact that we would have liked him to be here in Denver, and 2 second-round picks in 2024 and 1 in 2026 to the Utah Jazz for Lauri Markkanen. And Lauri Markkanen is going to be one of those guys where he can do a lot of nice things when it comes to his skill sets as well. Lauri Markkanen, he is a finisher. He's a spacer. I mean, he averaged 23 points, almost 40% from three-point range, at 8.2 rebounds, and he's able to continuously be like that size that you need next to Jokic, that's going to be able to kind of be a little bit more on the defensive side, kind of in that paint rim protection side of things, but also have the upside on the offensive side. So I think that could be a very, very interesting option, especially with his skill set and fitting into this. So then you would be looking at an roster for the Denver Nuggets starting lineup of Jamal Murray, Markkanen could slot into that small forward potentially. So you have a bigger lineup.
He's probably playing the 3. I mean, but
Um,
MPJ was
Aaron,
6'10", so it's not.
yeah, so it fits. Aaron Gordon and Nikola Jokic, the size. We talk a lot about size when it comes to some of these teams, and it's like, man, like in the playoffs, that would be massive. But that would be an option. Again, Michael Porter Jr. would need to be that upside for the Utah Jazz to make that work. And Utah, on the other hand, if you're taking a look at the roster coming in for them, the Utah Jazz would be, they have Colin Sexton. They would have Michael Porter Jr., John Collins, Keontae George, a nice young kid, but they're still kind of rebuilding. So they need to kind of put together, something to build around. And Michael Porter Jr. kind of gives that option to them. And then they can start fitting in pieces accordingly, right? So they finished 31-51 in the division, Northwest Division, 4th overall in the division. So they need to make something happen. And then this could be an option for both that could fit.
Yeah, JQ in the chat has a good question. Are you trading MPJ for 1 year of Laurie? Because he is on an expiring. It's actually wildly team friendly. I think he's making like $18 million next year. No, I think if you're the Nuggets and if you do let KCP move on and you move on from MPJ's deal, you have plenty of room then to, whether you want to do it right away after the trade or wait till after the season. You have room to fit Lauri Markkanen into your budget with those 2 players off the budget and Zeke Naji off the budget. So obviously you don't want to trade MPJ for a 1-year rental. You can't have that. So that would have to mean Lauri Markkanen's in the long-term plans. I think Lauri Markkanen's a really, really nice player. I think he's similar to MPJ in a lot of aspects, but he's a little more well-rounded, a little more established, been in the league longer, and has more nuance to his game as far as getting in the paint, just a shot maker where, MPJ, like 80% of his shots are based off of, a catch and shoot basically, right? Or an assist in some fashion. So if we can get Markkanen, I think that along with that, starting 5 and move on from MPJ and Zeke Naji and, some picks, I'm all here for it. I'm all here for it. He's a phenomenal player. I think he's been better in Utah than people even expected. A fringe all-star type guy that, obviously Jokic has never played with an all-star, Chris, or at least not one on the same time at the same time on the roster. So that maybe that would be a first. Who knows? But this deal would be great for Denver. Does Utah pull that trigger? I think Markkanen's going to be a hot commodity, so there's going to be a competitive trade market for him. And then also Utah could decide to sign him to a long-term deal because they need, dudes out there and think they're closer than you think. So I'd love Laurie in Denver. I know a lot of people think like OKC's a natural fit. So we'll see what happens. But Laurie in Denver is another guy. I like this one even more than Mikal Bridges because I think he slots in and fits in better than Mikal Bridges does. So I would love this trade as a Nuggets fan.
Yeah, and honestly, there's a lot. We're talking about players that are going to be asked, like Bridges, Markkanen. They're going to be coveted. I think, and you mentioned OKC. I think he would be perfect in OKC. That's exactly what OKC needs, and that's what I've been kind of vouching for them a little bit. I'm like, I would hate for them to get him, but I would love to see what he can do there next to a Chet Holmgren because they have no size outside of Chet. It's kind of a small team, and they need something like him to.
They got
piece
beat
it
up
all
on
together.
the boards last year or this past playoffs with Dallas. So,
yeah. So yeah, I think that would be, but selfishly, I would rather him be in a trade coming this way, more so than OKC, because then that means OKC is going to be wildly good for a long time. So MPJ, Gillespie, and a first rounder for Luka. There's a lot
Who
of
would
Luka.
say no? Who says no?
There was a lot of Luka trade talk after the series and like Twitter, and I'm like,
Chris,
there's no shot.
recently Jokic took a picture with Bogdanovich, and now everyone's like, well, we got to trade for Bogdanovich because he's friends with Joker. I'm like, I don't think that's how it works. Not that I would be totally opposed, but who are we moving for? And that dude's a defensive liability, so hard pass for me. But
hard pass. Yeah, I think we'd be taking maybe a step back, potentially.
no,
I mean,
we have trade MPJ in a second to Atlanta for Bogdanovich and Capella. Yeah, outside of like, I like Bogdanovich as a fit offensively. He's a bigger liability than MPJ is defensively. I don't even think it's particularly close. Capella is that'd be a great backup big to spell Jokic. So I don't hate that move at all. But you're not getting better defensively, that's for sure.
well, at that rate, you keep MPJ and you draft a big, and you just go into the season with what you got. I mean, I think because obviously, if you're gonna take a step backwards defensively with a Bogdanovich, then it's like, okay, well, how does that really help us? Because that's what we kind of need in those scenarios. We don't need liabilities late in playoff games. We have to figure out who are we going to slot in here, and it just you're in the same position, and you're almost got worse offensively because you trust MPJ offensively more than probably Bogdanovich in the grand scheme of things. So it probably doesn't work. Dayron Holmes, by the way, shout out in the chat. He's one of my dream scenarios. He's climbing draft boards, and it probably isn't likely.
I fear he's not going to be there at this point, but there is a lot of heat out there that the Nuggets have already promised him. If he's there, they'll take him. Dayron Holmes out of Dayton, right? What am I doing right
Dayton.
now?
Yep, yeah. Dayton. And he's climbed into probably a top 15. Bring back Bol can't even stay on his own teams right now. he can't play on any team that he goes to. All right, let's get to the last trade here, and it involves the Chicago Bulls. Scotty, do you want to run through this one?
Yeah, this one's probably a little less splashy, but maybe more realistic than the other two. I could see this happening. And you're like, oh, Zach LaVine, because he's been rumored on the move. This does not involve Zach LaVine, but this involves like Nugget fans, a dude they've wanted on this roster. I feel like for years now, they are always like, oh, if we could just have this guy. So Nuggets are shipping off in this trade. They're keeping MPJ. I do want to say this does mean KCP is not re-signing with the team. So KCP moves on in this scenario. We send Zeke Naji. Oh my gosh, I actually forgot what it was.
Zeke Naji, Peyton Watson.
Peyton Watson, which people are going to be furious about. Zeke Naji, Peyton Watson, and a second rounder to Chicago for Alex Caruso. Listen, Alex Caruso would be a phenomenal fit in Denver. And it doesn't stop there. If we do this deal, that gets us under the second apron. And along with signing Alex Caruso, I think we, make a move for a backup big. Like you have the mid-level exception available to you because you're under that second apron. You could offer $5 million a year to Andre Drummond as your backup big that can spell. He could do the job there. You add Alex Caruso, who's a defensive stalwart, solid offensive player into the mix. Coming off the bench, a more reliable guy. And then you could still make moves like, moving Julian Strother or somebody to get a shooter, off the bench. I think we do need more shot making off the bench. Not a lot of shooting coming off the bench for us. This does push Christian Braun into the starting lineup. I know everyone's like, if Christian Braun could just make threes. I think he has it in him more so than I do Peyton Watson. And that's why I move on from Peyton Watson. I love Peyton Watson's game, but I don't know. Peyton Watson's shot scares me. I don't know if that form never will be consistent to me. It looks a little sketch. Christian Braun, I'm a Kansas fan. I saw it in person. Like, the dude has it in him. I think he just, hasn't got the minutes yet where he can get comfortable and loose on the court. But if he gets in the gym, and he's a gym rat, and just works on his shot all off season, he can replace KCP, in my opinion. Then you have Alex Caruso and Andre Drummond coming off the bench. That instantly makes our depth, I think, better for winning right now. I love Peyton Watson's upside, but these are guys that are to win right here, right now.
Yeah, and then the Chicago Bulls end up getting, a solid upside with some of the young talent that's coming through in this deal as well, right? So, with that being said, I think it fits. They'll be able to. I mean, Peyton Watson can offer some. He's got one of the higher upsides of the young rookies or the young players, I should say, because he's a second year coming in, and his athleticism, his defense, he's electric when he's really attacking the rim and doing some nice things like there. So I think fitting in with Chicago could be nice. But really what you're getting for the Denver Nuggets is just a guy who's just on ball defense is going to be suffocating. He's very, very good. He's got a good feel for the game. He shoots well from three, just around 40%. And he's been on a championship team in the past. So he knows what it's like. And to fit into a championship caliber team like the Denver Nuggets right now would be a veteran presence that I think would be absolutely needed for this team to, consistently have that mindset. He knows what it takes to win a title. But I love Alex Caruso. There's going to be a bidding war for him as well. All three guys that we've looked at are kind of going to be really coveted. And
Chicago has a lot of guys on the block, and I think Chicago was trying to get 2 first-rounders for Caruso at the deadline last year. Now he is on the last year of his deal. It's a very friendly deal. I think he's making about $9 million this year, Chris.
Yeah,
so it's very team friendly to bring him in. So it'll probably be a little less than 2 firsts, and I think Peyton Watson and getting off the Zeke Naji contract and throwing in like a second. Hopefully that would entice him enough, but there's going to be competition there. So I just think Alex Caruso and Andre Drummond would be really, really nice pieces, reliable pieces off this bench. That would be nice. But who knows, Chris? I mean, I still think the most likely thing is like them running it back. Everything hinges on KCP. And of course, he has up until the 29th of June, Chris, to either accept or decline. Hopefully he's let the Nuggets know what he's going to do. I think he's going to decline that player option. I think everyone does. That's for probably $15 million, because I think he can make upwards of $20 million on the market. So he likely will, but that doesn't happen until the 29th, which is of course 2 days after 2 days after the draft ends. So that doesn't do the Nuggets any favors in that sense, but this team's close, Chris. They very well could just choose to run it back.
Yeah.
Try and get a couple cheap contracts on there, make a pick at 28 that adds some depth, whether that's they could use a guard, a wing, and a big. So it might just be who they value there, but it's going to be a fun offseason. And listen, Chris, there were a lot of people that came out in the finals and were like, man, I kind of wish the Nuggets made it. And these aren't Nuggets fans. These are people being like, I think that this NBA Finals could have been an epic competitive series, because I think the Nuggets match up way better against Boston than any other team in the NBA probably can.
Yeah, I honestly think if the Nuggets win that series with Minnesota, they win the title. Even especially what we saw from the shooting woes in a couple of those early games with Boston. I mean, the Nuggets would have been in a lot more of a competitive series than what we saw from Dallas, unfortunately. Darren, how likely do you feel each of your trade scenarios are, scale 1 to 10? All of them are going to be probably pretty low.
And they're all below 5.
They're all below 5.
We're not in the office, to know what they're thinking. I would say of those 3, I think maybe the last one's maybe the most.
Caruso's probably like a 4, maybe.
I think Mikal is probably the least likely.
Mikal is probably like a 1 or a 2. I would say Markkanen is probably a 2, and then a 4 for. But all of them are mostly unlikely in the grand scheme of things, only because the Nuggets just are so restricted based off of where they're at and what the contracts look like. Like we mentioned, there's 4 teams that are in that second apron. So when you're looking at the Celtics, the Nuggets, the Wolves, and the Suns, they're all very limited in how they could improve their rosters. And, that's a whole thing that, we're going to be looking at moving forward, is how the parity of NBA teams are built and how you're building from the ground up, and balancing rosters with young talent that's cheap versus top end talent where you're not having 3 max contracts on a team anymore, and it's not going to be as feasible to do and build teams that way. So it's all a puzzle.
You got to trust that some of these young guys, we need Strother to be way more consistent next year. Pickett to contribute in some fashion. Obviously, Christian Brown and Peyton Watson, if they can take the next steps, that would be huge for this roster, because we just need to be even with the reserves in, Chris. Just play level basketball with the backups in so that we can get the starters rest, because as we talked about, at least analytically, the starting 5 for the Nuggets last year, plus minus wise, was the best in all the NBA. When those 5 starters were on the court, that was the best 5 in all the NBA. So they have pieces. So maybe you try and run it back, but then you're relying on Michael Malone to play those pieces when maybe he doesn't want to, so they can grow a little bit. And maybe that means, some additional losses in the regular season, but honestly, who cares? This is a Nuggets team that's won a title. They can go on the road. I mean, they were down 2-0 to Minnesota, went and won 2 straight in Minnesota. So they can win on the road if they're not a high seed for the playoffs. So we got to get these guys involved. We got to get Christian Brown's confidence up. We got to get Peyton Watson's confidence up. We got to, get Julian Strother on the court where he starts hitting more shots and getting him defensively and seeing where it goes. But we have no backup big, Chris. So, yeah, earlier in the chat, if we have to settle on Mason Plumlee, we have to have a backup big.
Yeah.
To give Jokic some rest.
Yeah, absolutely. Whether you address that in the draft or whether you address that, in a free agent situation. I mean, there's been some free agent names in the center position that have popped up a little. Daniel Tice has popped up. You could sign him for potentially a cheap option. I mean, there's a couple different ways we can go to navigate that. So, do we need to make a trade for like a backup center? It's not the only option. We have some different ways that we can approach it. So, that being said, that's going to take us in for actually one more here. I want to get to one more. How realistic a trade for Jose Alvarado, and how good of a fit is he if they could trade for him?
I haven't heard his name mentioned a lot with the Nuggets. Obviously, he'd be a nice backup point guard that can spell Murray. I liked, his game a little bit with New Orleans this past season. But how realistic? I don't know how much New Orleans wants to move on from him. I mean, he's only in his second year. He's a cheap asset. I don't see New Orleans interested in moving him. New Orleans is ready to move on from Brandon Ingram, it sounds like. They're shopping him to anyone and everyone. But Jose Alvarado, a cheap, second-year player, they're gonna probably hold on to. So I don't think that's very likely.
Yeah. But guys, thank you for popping in, hanging out. Clarkson and Olynyk. Olynyk's another name, actually, by the way.
I love Olynyk. I just think we're gonna have a hard time getting him.
As a Gonzaga guy, I would love Olynyk because, actually, crazy enough, I have connections to, I have some connections with Gonzaga that connect me to Olynyk. So we could just come over and have a fun time out here in Denver. Meet up for a little beer or something. I don't know. Who knows? But guys, thank you so much for being here for this 2024 offseason trade idea live on Bleacher Report. We are going to be having more content hitting you. We have the NBA draft coming. A lot of that stuff is going to be on our other channel, ActionLab Sports. .com, and then also ActionLab on Twitch. We are live on Twitch every Wednesday. Thursdays we do some baseball talk, and Sundays we are doing a lot of NBA draft analysis. Who's going to be the players that you want to keep an eye on? How are the players at the top of the draft going to fluctuate before and after, rising stocks, dropping stocks? So make sure ActionLab on Twitch, you go check us out. We are live every Wednesday, Thursday, and Sunday nights at 9:30 Eastern. So go give us a follow, and then keep it tuned here to Bleacher Report app for all of our clips and everything else that we have going on. But until next time, for the two-man game with Chris and Scott, thank you for being here, and we will see you guys next time. Love you.
Appreciate you all. Enjoy the offseason. Let's go Nuggies.
Go Nuggets. Let's get it.